Hi, I'm John Bonin with BTRG, and I'm here with Sunil Soares, IBM Director of Information Governance and author of the books, The IBM Data Governance Unified Process, Driving Business Value with IBM Software and Best Practices, and Selling Information Governance to the Business. Also joining me is Mike Martin, BTRG's Information Governance Practice Director. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to join me. Both BTRG and IBM are preparing to attend the Oracle HCM Users Group Conference in Las Vegas, June 18th to 22nd. Sunil, why should learning more about information governance be a top priority for the HR leaders attending the OHUG conference?
Thank you, John. There are a few different aspects of information governance that should really be topical for HR leaders. They are privacy, data quality, and metadata. So let's take them in order. So if you think about privacy, I was working with a large manufacturing company that was implementing an ERP package, and they were looking as part of that implementation to outsource some of the processing overseas. And the vice president of HR was very concerned about sensitive employee information being available to non-employees. So we had to go through a process to actually mask some of the employee data. Now looking at data quality, a classic question that comes up a lot is simple. How many employees do we have? I was working with a large software company who literally spent months and months trying to get to the answer to that question. So they started by looking at their ERP system, and they found out that they had not just full-time employees, but also part-time employees. Now, what about contingent employees? So that was a challenge. Then they went to the badging system, and they looked at all the employees who had badges, and guess what? Even vendors had badges, so that was another challenge. So it took them a long time to get to the answer to the question, how many employees do we have? Now, coming to metadata, metadata is, well, data about data. Now, if you think about business metadata, it's about business definitions. So I've had a government client who struggled with a simple definition, or maybe a not so simple definition for FTE, full-time equivalent. They were told that their total employee headcount could not exceed 200,000 FTEs. But then the real question was, how did you define an FTE? There were three different definitions for FTE, and depending on the definition, they could have been above or below that threshold. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, given the high-profile data breaches that have made headlines recently, data privacy is sure to be on the minds of conference attendees. Is there anything that you would like to tell them?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, John. And as Sunil just mentioned, data security and privacy is a paramount issue for companies. They collect a lot of sensitive data about their employees, personal data, or even confidential data about their customers. There are also laws and regulations that govern everything that they do with this data. So many of our clients struggle with securing this data across their enterprise, across multiple different application systems. So the cost of this can also skyrocket quickly as you're looking at an enterprise approach to data security. That's one of the reasons we've developed a solution we call the Data Masking Factory for InfoSphere Optum, the IBM Optum solution. Our masking factory actually extends the capabilities of IBM's InfoSphere Optum product. It essentially automates several phases of a project: the discovery, the requirements gathering, the analysis, and also the building of the solution is automated by our data masking factory. In doing this, we actually cut the duration of a data privacy project very significantly, up to 5 or 10 times. So just as an example, a recent client of ours, we masked 18 systems across the enterprise. We did that in 14 weeks. The project was actually completed 2 weeks early and 40% under budget, while at the same time providing a market value of $22 billion worth of data protection. So needless to say, we get a lot of positive feedback about this solution. And in fact, it was recently recognized as an IBM Beacon Award finalist this year.
Wow, that's great, Mike. The data masking factor really sounds like something HR leaders should look into at the OHUG conference. And congratulations on the Beacon Award. Sunil, IBM has always been on the forefront of solving the big challenges businesses face, and today is no exception. We hear the term big data all the time now. What's your definition of big data, and does it require a new approach from a governance perspective?
Thanks, John. That's a great question. Well, we think about big data as data that has one or more of the three V's. It's got volume, velocity, and variety. But I like to think about big data as ultimately being about data. So I've come up with a framework to classify big data into 5 different types. And those types are web and social media, machine-to-machine data. So think of that as machine-generated data or sensor data, big transaction data, biometric data, and human-generated data. Now, if you think about employees and HR, all these different big data types apply to them. So if you think about web and social media data, there's a lot of discussion in the industry about using social media data like Facebook to pre-screen employment candidates. Now, that can be a real challenge because in the traditional world, you should not be using protected information like age and gender to make a hiring decision. Now, if you're pre-screening an employee using social media, it is hard for you to defend the fact that you never used any such sensitive information. A lot of states like Maryland have or are in the process of actually legislating and prohibiting the use of social media data to pre-screen employment candidates. If you think about machine-to-machine data, potentially RFID data, there are certain situations where you might have RFID data that might show where an employee is located, right? If an employee is driving a van, should you be using that data to monitor the employee's movements? There's definitely questions around that. If you think about big transaction data, healthcare claims comes into mind right away. And we have a client who's using one of our tools called InfoSphere Guardian to be able to monitor who is accessing sensitive information within claims. So you probably don't want your database administrators to be looking up the claims information for your CEO. When you think about biometric information, that could be genetic information, it could be fingerprints, it could be retinal scans, and there's definitely a lot of questions around whether you can and should be using that information in the workplace and how you can use it. And finally, when you think about human-generated data, think about all the data that employees generate. Maybe they're making a call to your call center. Now, if you're doing post-call voice processing for quality assurance, you probably want to make sure that any sensitive information about the employee is actually masked before you actually start analyzing those calls. So definitely, I think big data is very interesting. It has a lot of applicability to human resource professionals, but I think it's important to get down to the specific big data types.
Sunil, while these concepts certainly seem to resonate with people, we find that few enterprise-level organizations have a governance strategy or policies in place. What do you think is holding them back?
That's a great question. I think it might be a challenge sometimes to do enterprise information governance because that could almost imply you're trying to boil the ocean and solve every problem. I think what's holding organizations back at the end of the day is alignment between business and IT. And it can be very hard to align business and IT around a range of business problems. So I think it's much more valuable if you were to say we're a manufacturer and we want to get a better handle on our procurement costs. Therefore, we need a single view of our vendors. And that means we need to work with our supply chain or our procurement or our finance organization to be able to do that. Or if you'd like to safeguard employee data or you'd like better data quality and metadata around your employee data, then you'd like to work with the Vice President of Human Resources. So I think the recipe book is you've got to have a clear articulation of the business problem. You've got to understand who your executive sponsors are. And finally, you've got to measure results. You've got to make sure that you can demonstrate and communicate to the business how you've actually made strides in improving the quality, privacy, and the metadata relating to the data.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, what's your perspective here?
Yeah, that's excellent points that Sunil made there. Many times it comes down to funding combined with the difficulties in illustrating your cost savings and benefits, as well as the focus and having a defined scope to look for something that's tangible. So that's why at BTRG we take a very solution-based approach to information governance. We basically help organizations establish and embrace enterprise level governance practices by starting with solving existing problems and then build from success. And that's one of the reasons we work a lot with the IBM InfoSphere products, right? So with our experience, we implement InfoSphere solutions like Optum, Guardian, volume and discovery quickly and cost effectively. So as part of our services, we do exactly what Sunil was talking about. We define success criteria at the outset, make sure we have the proper scope around a tangible problem, and then help our customers measure results to capture ROI. Some of the results we get with our customers have really even exceeded my expectations. For example, we had a client who was experiencing performance issues in their ERP package, and they had a nightly batch process that just wasn't completing by the morning. Now, this meant that they couldn't ship product. Product shipments were getting delayed if this process didn't complete. So they engaged with BTRG to come in and look at their system. And we implemented an Optum archiving production archive that improved the performance of this batch process by 60%. So there's hard dollar savings there with not having to purchase additional hardware, CPU and disk RAM and things like that, while at the same time we preserved this archive data in a format that was secure and immutable. So this means we're meeting their data retention and privacy requirements while retaining complete access to that data. The end result isn't just savings and ROI, it's also compliance and complete management of your data growth problem. This is an ongoing solution that is now part of the application. We can keep data volumes in production manageable while at the same time improving performance. So with a success like that, where it's very tangible solving a problem, we can then build toward more complete information governance strategies for our customers, and that's what many of them are doing.
Thank you, Mike. That's great. Sunil, I have one last question for you. I hear that you've got a new book in the works. What's it about?
Thanks, John. The title of the book is Big Data Governance: An Emerging Imperative, and it really takes the different disciplines of information governance, organization and stewardship, privacy, data quality, metadata, master data integration, information lifecycle management, and shows how they apply to this big data world, right? Web and social media, machine to machine, big transaction data, biometrics, and human-generated data.
Sounds like something we should all read. When does it hit the shelves, and where can I get a copy?
Thanks, John. So the book's going to be released at IBM's Information on Demand conference in October this year in Las Vegas. And, it should definitely be available from your favorite bookseller as well.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Sunil and Mike, for taking the time to speak with me today and for sharing both your insight and your experience. Before we end, I'd just like to take a moment to remind listeners to stop by IBM's booth 711 and BTRG's booth 511 at the OHUG conference for more information. Hope to see you there, and thank you.